welcome back to another edition of the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. I am Ray Russell, and this week we continue on our journey into the mid-1980s Georgia Championship Wrestling, now Championship Wrestling from Georgia. And in order to do that, we're going to talk to Ole's right-hand man at the time, his agent, if you will. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back Bob Roop.
Well, it's good to be back with our listeners.
Absolutely.
Hello. Good to see you. See you. Good to hear you. I hope to see you.
Well, you were on TV for so long, man. It's just old habit, right?
Yes. And don't forget about Waterloo Hall of Fame, 17th, 18th, 19th of July, because I'll be there. And that's where I can see you. So please come and attend.
Yeah.
And hello to you, Ray. Good to see you. Good to hear you, too.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always a good time here to get together and just have some fun conversations about the good old days and look forward to the future, too. We talk about the past, and this is the present and the future, of course, coming up in Waterloo this summer, guys. Be sure to be a part of it. It's going to be a fun time, no doubt about it. Every year you always hear great experiences coming out of those events that they put together there. They're real classy individuals, those guys that put together the Waterloo stuff, the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame deal, and all of the talent that appears on those shows. And sometimes people just pop up for the hell of it, too, some of the old-time workers and things. So it's
oh,
yeah.
A blast. Well, Baron von Raschke, Jim Raschke, is always there. I'm not sure what other inductor guys that are already members are there, but all of them that can make it will show up. And it is a place where you can very easily mingle. In fact, it's designed. The museum is open. They don't have a place where the pro wrestlers just
hide away.
I mean, the only way you can really hide away there if you want to. I mean, I don't know why you would. You get there and then you hide in the only way you can really hide is in your hotel room.
Right.
But who wants to do that? I mean, it's a great time. A lot of the fans stay at the same hotel that the wrestlers do, and so you might see people might sit down, have breakfast or lunch with somebody. They have a continental or free breakfast that's always, so they've got everything, eggs and all kinds, eggs, sausage, biscuits and gravy, and all kinds of good stuff for breakfast. Yeah, I look forward to seeing some of our listeners there. That's the reason you and I are actually talking today, is because we do have our loyal fans or listeners out there. Maybe not fans. There might be somebody out there still mad at me about who knows what. But
you'd be surprised how many people hold on to their hatred of things that they had nothing to do with to begin with. It's just people, they need something in their life, I suppose, and that's what we're doing.
Well, some people like being pissed off. They like being mad.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you feel that way, you probably shouldn't come to Waterloo and come and see me, because, I'm looking for positive at this stage of my life. I'm looking for positive experiences every day. Those of you who have been with us for a while know that I've had some medical problems over the last 8 or 9 months. Nothing deadly serious, except that one time I couldn't breathe.
Well, except for that one time I couldn't breathe. Yeah, that one right there. Yeah, there you go.
That one, yeah. But you know what? I saved that one for, I hadn't to actually be in my doctor's office when that happened. So it was real handy. They were able to bring in a thing to relieve my distress pretty quickly, within a few minutes. So
Sure. That's always good. Well, it's summer now, so we're getting there anyway, so hopefully no more of that for a while anyway. But right now, man, I'm hoping great health throughout the summer, lots of fresh air and sunshine and things of that nature. But I was looking at some of the guys that are going to be there that weekend at the Hall of Fame with you. Of course, Bob Roop is going to be there, believe it or not. Baron von Raschke has recently been announced. That's all the people needs to know. But I do have some other ones on here. We got Ron Simmons is going to be there. You were on Briscoe and Bradshaw, then they're both going to be there. Of course, Gerald Briscoe's there, and JBL himself. Sergeant Slaughter is going to be there. Medusa, female wrestler. Eric Bischoff. David Crockett's going to be there. Maybe you'll run into David while you're there. Thunderbolt Patterson. You remember him from Blast from the Past. Brian Blair. So lots of talent's going to be there. It's going to be a fun time.
Yeah, oh, it is. It is every year. We have a good time. They put on a nice program. And one of the things I really like about Waterloo, besides, I mean, I sound like I'm bragging, but I'm in several Hall of Fames. The one I like about Waterloo is that it's also connected to the National Museum of Wrestling, and I want to say Norman, Oklahoma. I'm not sure if that's right. The Waterloo Blue Fez Tragos Hall of Fame it's affiliated with the National Amateur Athletic place where they have it has all amateur wrestling, high school, college, international, and this all amateur except for the Waterloo Hall of Fame, which you had to have an amateur background of some note. You also are pro wrestlers, and normally the amateurs and the pros, amateur wrestlers didn't want to have anything to do with pro wrestling because, they didn't consider, I was the same way when I was an amateur, you didn't consider it really real wrestling. But, it is athletic. But the fact that they would affiliate the pro wrestling into the National Hall of Fame is very meaningful to me. It means that they see some value in the museum too, mm-hmm. which I appreciate. So anyway, hope to see you there, folks.
Yeah, we were talking off air. You recently ran into an old friend of yours, a silver medal, I believe you were telling me about. You won in the amateurs, something that took you on your way to the Olympics. I don't know if that was a story you wanted to share at the top of the program this week before we get back into Georgia.
As I mentioned, I was going to let you decide when to talk about it, but yeah, I was cleaning up my office yesterday, and I came across there was actually a plastic grocery bag that had some stuff in it, and I pulled out one of the medals, and it was very tarnished because it's from 1968. Once I looked at it, I saw there was some writing on the back. I had forgotten all about this. And the back it says 1968 Greco-Roman Wrestling, second place heavyweight. On the front, it's got a picture, I think it's of Nike hanging out, female goddess Nike handing out garlands. And it says Amateur Athletic Union of the United States. And this, I know why I put this medal away, because it was for second place. And I wrestled in the AAU tournament about 5 or 6 times, and I always placed. I took a 4th, 3rd, and this was actually a 1-1 at 220 at my last tournament as an amateur in 1969, a year later. But in 68, I had this tournament won, and I had a nemesis that I couldn't beat, for some reason, he didn't wrestle in this tournament. So I went into my last match. All I had to do was lose my last match. If I lost, the way the scoring went in international wrestling, it wasn't single elimination. It's on a point system. Even if I had lost a match, I still would have won the national championship. As strange as that sounds, all I had to do was lose. But what happened? I went out there against a guy who was pretty decent. I bent over backwards trying to beat him. And I did a move where all I had, in that style, all you had to do was, if your shoulders touched, you didn't have to hold somebody down for a second or two. If your shoulders touched, your shoulder blades touched at the same time, you were pinned. And I did a move where I rolled across my back. They called a pin, so I lost by a pinfall. I couldn't believe it. And the way it ended up, a guy that I pinned in an earlier match ended up taking the championship, and I was in second place. And I don't even look at the picture they have the picture of you on the reviewing stand, like when they're handing out medals for the Olympics. You're on the stand with steps, the lower steps, and the champions stand on the highest platform. But this silver medal has a special meaning to me, because the Olympic tryouts were about 2 months later. This is 1968. And this tournament was in, let's say February. The Olympic tryouts were in March, I believe. I went into the Olympic tryouts with that experience of being foolish with my strategy and trying too hard to beat that guy. I didn't want to lose, but I very easily could have drawn with him, just had a tie. And I went into the Olympic trials with a much more better attitude in terms of being winning matches. I ended up wrestling the same guy again, but anyway, he was the one that ended up being the alternate. When you go to the Olympics, you always have an alternate. Your alternate is always there, and the guy who takes second in the Olympic tryouts has a chance to win to replace the champion or the winner of the Olympic tryouts at the actual training camp. If the second place guy can beat the champion twice, has to beat him twice, then he takes his place because he's obviously better. So the same guy that I got penned by I penned myself really, but I got to give him credit. The runner-up for the Olympic trials also, and I managed to beat him at the Olympic trials. But I'm looking at the silver medal, and again, I never like second place, but you are an All-American by taking second place, by through fourth, and this silver medal actually is responsible is a representation of, I think, why I was able to win the Olympic trials, because I got a severe lesson. When I got beat in that match in the national AAU, when I got beat, I actually walked outside and I was walking around hoping it was a dream. I just couldn't believe it. I'd been so close to being a national champion, and I just had seen my dreams disappear. I hadn't won one yet. So anyway, that's I don't want to I don't bore our listeners any longer, but yeah, sometimes second place can help you out. If you want that first place, whatever mistakes you made in getting second, you don't do those anymore. So yeah, it has a special meaning to me. So thanks for letting me talk about that.
Absolutely. I mean, it is all about Bob Roop. It's not just about pro wrestling here, but it's nice to get those stories, especially when it's a story locked back in your mind. You weren't really thinking about it, and boom, out of the blue, you run into this, again, I call it an old friend, this silver medal, but it's like you said, you learn from experiences, right? And it's not like you fell off your horse, because, man, silver medal, second place is not that bad, but you were aiming to be the best. And, that's, a lot of people aspire to be the best. They don't just settle for second. And that's just, an amazing little story to go back in time, a long way back in time. We haven't been back to 1968 since the beginning of this program, which was well over a year ago. So it's fun to jump around a little bit like that, Bob, but it's just good times. I'm glad you shared that with everybody.
Well, the Americans we are very demanding as a people. I don't know if many people remember who lost the World Series last year, or who got beaten in the Super Bowl. I mean, we all remember the champions. Over the years, I had people who found out somehow that I had been in the Olympics, and they'd go, "How did you do?" And I said, "Well, I took seventh place." And they went, "Oh, like almost, oh, that's too bad. Oh, poor you." And I couldn't believe it. It's like they were embarrassed for me.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, seventh in the world at anything.
No kidding.
I mean, maybe if basket weaving, whatever it might be. They have BB guns and bow and arrows at the Olympics, and canoeing and all kinds of things. Second place at anything is or seventh place in the world. It's nothing to be ashamed of. But it took me I actually hid. I tried not to let it come out for years and years, until finally, when I got into Boy Scouts with my own, and Cub Scouts with my own kids, and the motto was "Do your best." And I thought, you know what? I did my best. And those guys I wrestled in the Olympics, all those guys were pros. That's what they did. Mm-hmm. That was all the foreign, not everybody, but all the Europeans, the Russians, for example, all that was their job in life. That's what they did. The top guys, they didn't have some other job. And then wrestle, practice on their own or after work. They lived it. They did it full time every day. China and Russia and a lot of the countries have their wrestlers are professional in the sense they get paid to do it.
Yeah.
In fact, during the '68 Olympics, one of the Saudis, they let it be known that a gold medal was worth $25,000 to them, a silver was 15, and a bronze was 10. That they medaled, their government was going to reward them with that kind of money. And you're the one that can tell what $25,000 in 1968 would be worth. What kind of money that would be today. Probably a couple $100,000 or whatever. The guy I wrestled and the Russian I wrestled was 46 years old at the time. And that might sound like an old man, but no. All he did was train and eating the best food and, having the best kind of those guys all got massages after their matches. You could see them in the training room. But their own team, they had masseuse and all kinds of things that United States team didn't have for some reason. But anyway, I'm thanks for letting me talk about it, Ray.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, it's nice to jump around, especially go back and just remind everybody where we all started. We started as an amateur, right? And now we're here working as a wrestler and sometimes as an agent. And right now that's kind of your job here working with Ole Anderson. But with Vince coming in and taking over TBS, they lose that 6:05 p.m. time slot. They lose TBS studios to record in. And Ole's forced to find new operation overnight. And you guys move to Macon, our new TV studio to record from. And it doesn't take long for Ole to get back on TBS as well, thanks to a little help from Ann Gunkel and her conversations with Ted Turner. Now, when you guys go back on the air, it's no longer going to be in a primetime slot. It's not going to be on Saturday nights. It's going to be Saturday mornings. And that's kind of a bad situation, I would say, to be in because, A lot of adults aren't looking for sports content or pro wrestling at 9 a.m., right? They're reading their newspaper, they're having their breakfast, they're going out there and doing the yard or whatever you do on a Saturday morning. And meanwhile, the kids, now you're competing with Saturday morning cartoons. And I know that sounds silly, but me being 4, 5, 6, 7, Bob, I got to tell you, I loved wrestling, but I loved cartoons even more. And so it was,
of course,
I would be flipping back and forth, which episode's on today of the cartoon and blah, blah, blah. And so that was going to cost Ole a lot of viewers, both kids and adults. And of course, everybody was trained to watch wrestling at 6:05 all those years there. And so, it's very different situation where you guys are going to be walking into. And so what I did was I pulled the old book back out, the book according to Ole, if you will. And I'm going to read some excerpts here for you, and we'll discuss as things transpired.
Sounds good.
So Ole aptly names this title Starting from Scratch. He says, when Vince McMahon took over the time slots of TBS, I heard that part of his agreement with Ted Turner was that he would tape a live show at the TBS studios. Now, I don't know if that was part of the contract, but if it was, Vince reneged on the deal. Go figure. He bicycled his tapes that were produced in New York or wherever their production facilities were located. He bicycled them down to Atlanta. He would send guys to Atlanta to do interviews now and then, but he wasn't producing a live show in Atlanta, Georgia. The rumor was that Ted was really upset, especially when the ratings went south. I got my money from McMahon on a Wednesday. I don't think Vince would leave a loophole like this today, but he never asked me to sign a non-compete. He thought we were out for good. On Thursday, the following day after I was paid by Vince, Ann Gunkel took me to see Ted Turner. Ralph Freed and I were back on the air with our new promotion, World Championship Wrestling, on the following Saturday. And if you go back and look, the footage is out there. Ole's not lying. It's almost like there's no downtime. Everything changes. The studio changes, the time changes, but you guys are right back on TV before you know it.
Yeah. I don't remember any big, long hiatus, like a month or two off. It seemed like we went from, we didn't miss a stroke. We went from, TV, of course, we weren't at TBS anymore. We started taping and making. And, I remember making a drive to and fro just for TV, which it was different. But Ole took advantage of, whatever resources he had with Ann Gunkel. I wasn't aware. That part of it is history to me, too, because, Ole didn't tell me he didn't spend any time talking about what he had done. He was always talking about what we were going to do, because there's always things coming up. And once something was taken care of, he immediately moved on. Now, okay, now we've got the TV in making. What next do we do? What do we have to do next? And they probably started looking at talent, because he knew, by that time, I'm sure he knew that he had lost the guys that did leave. And some of the stuff we talked about in the past, I've had time to think about me against Nick Patrick. It's a way of adding, that was a way of adding an extra match to the card that had a little bit of intrigue to it, in the sense of in the mind of a fan. It's like
right.
Bob Roop against a guy who was a former referee, or, he's been a referee that we've never seen him wrestle. I don't know if Nick had been on TV as a wrestler yet. I don't remember that.
Not in Georgia, I don't believe.
Right. So, and like you say, I had an earlier match with somebody else, and then Nick and I were doing this lights out. Well, again, it was a way of adding a match to the card. Mm-hmm. Ole was using every booking angle and machination that he could think of to spice up the cards, because we were lacking. We had a bunch of new guys, and we were lacking. Some of those main event heels were gone. The Spoiler and the Russian, and some big holes to fill. So it would be one thing if you had your entire roster of wrestlers stuck with you, but you went to that Saturday morning 9:00 spot. You're still going to lose 9/10 of your audience or more.
I don't know what the ratings were, but I have to imagine there was a gigantic dip.
Oh, had to be, yeah, and I think that Ole, looking back now, it's easier. Ole was always planning ahead. I think he was looking to make as much as he could. Now think of all the effort he'd put into Championship Wrestling for Georgia to make it successful, his time and money. And when McMahon took it away from him, that money, that steady influx of serious money, stopped. So Ole was looking for a way to get back on the money train. Let's put it that way. And we know what happened in later years. He went back and he got involved with the Four Horsemen and that, didn't he?
Yeah, Ole would be part of the original Four Horsemen. Right.
So at the time, he was he was just 40-ish, so he wasn't old. A lot of times, like in amateur wrestling, being 40 is considered ancient. Ole knew that he had to move on in some way, and he was going to make the best of what he could. He took advantage of, if you look at it from one standpoint, it was a way of not having to admit a total defeat, and like, okay, I got knocked down, but I got up, and here I am. I'm back, even in a very very limited way. He was back, on TV again, and he had a company that was viable. I mean, he had a product that he could sell if he wanted to, or at least make some money from.
He talked about Vince McMahon bicycling matches from other cities that he had been using on his other programs and airing them there on TBS, and that's exactly what he did, basically from the get-go. Now, Ted Turner does get upset with the ratings, and he was supposedly, I don't know if it was in the contract or not, but he was promised that Vince was going to be doing wrestling from the studio. And I guess Vince figured as long as he sends some guys down there to cut some promos in the studio, that's all that really mattered. But eventually, if you guys go back and look, and it's probably on YouTube somewhere, there are some shows later on where Vince is essentially forced to start running wrestling shows out of the TBS studio, much later on in this little venture that he has on TBS. In regards to that no compete clause, I have to say that, yeah, this is early Vince McMahon. He's still learning business at this point, because I have no doubt that a few years later that would have definitely been employed, whether he thought Ole was going to try to run with the ball the next day or not. Now, I'm sure Vince didn't think Ole had anything left. He took his TV station, he took his studio of where the wrestling was going to be held. He's going to wind up taking some of his talent. Other talent's going to leave because they don't see a dog left in this fight. So there's, right. And then Ann Gunkel steps in almost immediately and says, "This is what I'm going to do for you. I'm going to help you out." And Ole talked about the new promotion being called World Championship Wrestling. Well, we know it's actually Championship Wrestling from Georgia, but I'm not going to nitpick. I just want, because there's always people out there that are going to correct me. So I'll correct myself here, Bob, even though I'm correcting Ole. There's always those people on the social media, though. You got to have those people. Without them, they keep you right in the world, I suppose. But going back to the financials, I imagine that's a huge drop off as well. I'm sure he's going to lose some cities as he goes along. I'm going to be looking at the house show results and kind of get an idea of what we lost, like what towns immediately disappear, and how far we go before we start losing some of the out of Georgia cities and things of that nature. I know he's still going to Cleveland as late as he possibly can because, that was one of the big towns he was making the money. So they were still making some trips up to Ohio, maybe not as many cities, but they were trying to hit the big ones as much as they could. So we'll roll on. Ole says, our deal with Ted Turner was the same one we had before Vince took over. We would tape a program, this time 60 minutes, before it was 2 hours. So 60-minute TV show and do some interviews. The problem we had, though, was that it was a spur-of-the-moment deal. So the best time slot we could get for the show on TBS was 7 o'clock on Saturday morning. Wow, that is earlier than I thought, Bob. Vince had his show on TBS from 5 or 6 every evening on Saturday, in addition to a Sunday time slot. So Turner just worked us into the schedule where he could. However, we weren't taping the show at TBS. Ralph Freed made an arrangement to tape our show on Saturday morning at a TV studio in Macon that we had been doing business with for years. In addition to airing on TBS, we also bicycled the tape up to Columbus and Cleveland, Baltimore, and Maryland. So Ole's saying that they taped on Saturday mornings, but yet the show aired at 7 on Saturday morning. I'm not sure if he's getting a time frame wrong or what the deal is there. Do you remember how the tapings worked from Macon in regards to, did you record the same day it aired like you used to do with the Georgia Championship Wrestling show, or were you coming in a different day to record? How did that work?
I can't imagine that it was, we were taping live, but I can't remember. That might have been, that very possibly might have been the situation. I just don't recall. A lot of that time was a blur because there was so much change going on that very nerve-wracking for me to see what was going on. Ole was stunned by it, and of course I was too. But I stuck with him. He was my friend, and I suppose I could have gone like the other guys did and tried to get a job with McMahon, but like I said earlier, I didn't particularly care for him. And Ole was not just my boss, but as close as you can be to becoming friends and as a pro wrestler. But he was somebody I've mentioned many times that I respected and I admired. He started not too many years before I did, and look where he had come. He was a millionaire, very successful, clean living. Most of the guys we had our show where he found out just about everybody in his company everybody was doing something, some kind of drug, and he said, I think a quote you said was that I found out I had a bunch of drug addicts as my wrestlers.
Yeah.
But the fact that he was straight enough, in terms of his ethics, he wasn't someone who gossiped either. The fact that came as a surprise to him was really astounding when I think back on it, because it was just so common. The guys would talk about drugs like, talking about chewing gum. It was just so common. Somebody said, "Hey, so-and-so has got a good place to get some black beauties, or, which is speed and amphetamine of some kind." And then, anyway, it was very common. But that was another thing I liked about Ole, the fact that he was a guy you could admire, because he'd been subject to the same temptations that everybody else had. You're surrounded by, people who I talked about in Miami, Coke dealers bringing the liter of Coke into the dressing room and offering to let anybody who wanted just have a free blast at it. And it just was so common that the fact that he didn't even know about it shows that, he was in a different place and his value systems. And I still admire that, because one thing I haven't mentioned was that after Ole got a disease that put him in a wheelchair, multiple sclerosis or something like that, he would come to the Gulf Coast reunion in Mobile. I saw him down there. I mean, this is years afterwards. This is early in the early 2000s, and I would go and I'd see him there, and we'd chat and reminisce about old times. And a lot of the guys, Sandy Scott and Ronnie Garvin, and a bunch of the guys who would come, and a lot of the guys would come from that part of the country, and we'd all tell stories and everything. But in fact, that's where I got to know the masked wrestler who worked in Japan for so long. Destroyer, yeah. I got to know him a little bit down there. I'd never been anywhere with him where I had a chance to talk to him, like on a personal level. But I talked to him down there. He'd been a coach, a wrestling coach, wrestled in college and all that. And it was nice to get to know him. But Ole was there he went for a number of years. And he always had someone with him because he was in a wheelchair. I think he needed to get help to get in and out of his chair, or maybe just to steady, and he might have been able to get up by himself. But I remember asking Ole about treatment, and he could afford, he had the money, he could afford the most expensive medications or whatever, care, doctors. He could have gone to some specialist place in Europe if he needed to get treated. But, and he was doing everything he could. I'm sure he delayed the onset of the disease as best he could. It wasn't sad because he didn't feel sorry for himself, but it was unfortunate, to see a guy who had been so vital, to see him sort of negated or brought to a standstill like that. But he was still the same way verbally. He was still aggressive, and well, I did him a favor. I've been sleeping on a waterbed, and he told me something about he had a hard time sleeping because parts of his body would go to sleep, and it was hard for him to move around. So I went out and bought him. They're only about $40. I bought him a big air mattress. He had a room with 2 beds in it, and he was only using one of them, of course. So I brought the air mattress and put it up on the other bed, and he slept on it that night, and he said he slept much better. So I'm hoping that helped. Right. I know it did for me.
Good guy there, Bob Roop, taking care of the Ole Anderson. Yeah, that was MS. I remember that Ole had. So that'll eat you up. That'll cripple you for sure. So it's any comfort you can get, while you're battling that disease is, I'm sure, very appreciative. I'm sure Ole got a little extra sleep that night. So that's a very cool deal. You talked about you're working with Ole, and we go back here real quick to this time frame. So you're switching over from GCW to CWG, I guess the call letters would be now.
Right.
And I got to ask you, to the best of your recollection, everything's changing. Obviously, you guys are in a bind. Ole's certainly going to be in some sort of financial trouble pretty quickly, I would imagine, after this, business-wise, with Georgia. I'm not saying, he's seeing it in his bank account yet, but does he come to you or any of the talent? Do you remember him having a conversation where he said, well, this is what your guarantee was, and now we're going to have to lower it because I can't afford to pay you that anymore?
No. The Georgia towns still did okay. I don't remember Macon or Columbus falling off. Now, the Omni fell off. I don't remember those towns that Fred Ward and Ralph Reed were running. They could do a lot of local promoting. Those towns were still okay. And I don't remember. Yeah, if you can get some gate receipts, I don't remember. I do remember Cleveland when it was full, because that was, I remember the one night where the ring was, we had a full house, like 7:30, the ring still hadn't appeared. The ring crew got a flat tire or something. And I gave my little talk to all the wrestlers about, I showed them, hey, we got we got no ring here tonight. We got 8,000 people out there. We going to give them all their money back, or can somebody think of anything to do? And everybody just looked at me like, well, what could we possibly do? Ronnie Garvin, of course, said, well, we'll go out there and work on the floor, and that made sense to me. It'd be something different. I want to go back a second. If I said waterbed, about sleeping on a waterbed, I meant an air mattress. I hope
Sure.
I don't want to sound.
You did initially say waterbed, but you turned it into air mattress mid conversation.
Okay, yeah.
So I think people caught on there. But
yeah,
we got to keep you true, Bob. So that's
yeah. Well, yeah, I don't want to embarrass you. Ray saying, well, I can see Alzheimer's coming on my cohort here. I better start. Anyway, no, I didn't see a major change, and I didn't have a guarantee, but because I wasn't, I didn't wrestle much. The whole time I was a road agent, I think I was getting, I don't know, maybe $1,000 a week, which isn't, today's money's nothing. But, I wasn't even getting in the ring most of the time. So I considered that fair. I was making a good living, and I enjoyed working with Ole. It's nice when you can work with somebody you respect. And he was funny too. I mean, he had a good sense of humor. And I remember, I don't know if I told this one before, but he answered the phone one time, and he said, well, what's the problem? And he had mentioned earlier that he'd been working with Blackjack Mulligan, that I think he had a bruise or something on his shoulder check. He said, he was working with Mulligan, and he said, he got pretty stiff. And I said, well, I like working that way, so it wasn't a problem. Well, anyway, he got a call from Mulligan, and I was sitting there. I could overhear the call. Finally, he said the last thing he said was, well, you called me, Jack. Where do you think I am? I'm in the office. What happened? Mulligan called, and he was mad about something. And, it was the same Mulligan that sucker punched me when he got in that maniac mode. Well, he'd gotten that mode, and in his mind, he was mad at Ole. So he called him and cussed him out and all that. And then he said, well, hey, I want to fight. And Ole said, okay. Mulligan said, well, where are you? Ole said, hey, Jack, you called me. Where do you think I am? I'm at the office. Yeah, I thought that, and Mulligan never showed up, but Ole told a story then about Jack losing it sometimes. He had done it with, I think, Buck Robley and 2 or 3 other people, where he just out of the blue, just unloaded on him. And then later he'd say he was sorry, but when you've been blasted by a guy that weighs 320 pounds.
Yeah, I remember, when I was covering 1987 pretty deep on my Wrestling Memory Grenade podcast, I was going through the old Observers and some of the other dirt sheets of the time, if you will, and there was a thing that came out. Mulligan had a job with Vince for a little bit there at the end of 86 and the early part of 87, but sometime after that, he got into some kind of business deal. I'm not sure what kind of business it was with an associate of his, and he randomly cold-cocked this guy who was not a professional wrestler. And so this guy takes him to court. And by the story that I gather was, by the time the session was over, that the guy that was even pressing charges on Mulligan felt pity on him. Not sure why, but I think he understood that there was just maybe some mental health issues there or some psychological issues there. And so I'm not really sure what came of that lawsuit, but I do know that that's the way it was portrayed anyway. Going back and reading into it was just that it was just a sad situation where Mulligan would go off and do these things. And that was probably before he did it to you, Bob. So it wasn't the last time that he did that. But so I want to get back here while I don't want to stray too far away from the story we're telling.
Of course.
And you talked about the Omni. You said, I don't think, we were, I don't know if I'm going to have to go look and check and make sure you guys were even still in the Omni at this point. I know Vince started running the Omni as well. And
we probably weren't.
He debuts in the Omni August 25th in front of 9,000 fans. Now that's quickly going to drop. They're going to draw 2,000, 5,000, 4,000 for the rest of the year. But their debut show brings intrigue because maybe some people don't even watch the TV and they realize, oh, wrestling's coming back. I'm going to go check it out. And they see some of the guys in the ring they've never seen before, or not in quite a while anyway. But Vince, he stacks the deck here. I mean, he certainly does. I'm looking at he brings everybody in for the first show. Naturally, he would do that whenever he would invade a new territory. And I'm just looking at the guys underneath, just putting them over. Big John Studd, the Junkyard Dog, Nikolai Volkov, who had just left here, wrestling Rocky Johnson, Paul Orndorff, we remember his run here. Andre the Giant goes over in a battle royal. He does the ladies, Wendy Richter over Moolah, and Richter was a big deal there in the WWF, that rockin' wrestling era. She was managed by Cyndi Lauper at the time. Iron Sheik versus Sergeant Slaughter, that was a big storyline there at the time. The Spoiler comes back, wrestles Andre on the show, and Hulk Hogan in the main event over Dr. D, David Schultz. So Vince really built himself a card coming to town, and they meant business, and they drew very well on this first show. Now, I'm not necessarily sure what went awry. Probably same thing that happens with the TV. The fans just aren't interested in that World Wrestling Federation type shill. This is not the same Georgia wrestling that they were accustomed to.
No. Vince had a different attitude and philosophy about what kind of matches he held. It's not that they were horrible. It's just they were different from what Ole had been producing. Ole, not to say he didn't have gimmicks and things. For example, my match with Boogie Man, Jimmy Valiant, he had gimmick. He had guys in there with gimmicks, but he had always had a lot of wrestling, getting a hold and, not just meat chopping and beating each other up from one end to the other, from start to finish of the match, which becomes, rapidly becomes totally unbelievable. Wrestling was still, my God, working with Ole, you could hear him smack. He hit me in the chest with a forearm. You could hear it anywhere in the building, which was fine. I didn't have a problem with it. I smacked him back just as hard. I know that later on, again, in the interim between the time I retired and got involved again once the Hall of Fame stuff started coming along, but I know that Vince was doing a lot of stuff where they set up an angle out completely away from the ring. They'd be out in a parking lot or something going on somewhere in somebody's house. I remember this one promo I just absolutely couldn't believe. I don't remember exactly who it was, but one of Dusty's kids, the angle was he was having problems with his wife. They were separated. Dustin, yeah, they were separated and all that. And there was a heel that Dustin was working against. And they did this interview. I couldn't believe it. Like I say, I hadn't watched TV. What I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I hadn't watched TV for a long time. I mean, wrestling anyway. So this guy's what I'm looking at, and what drew my attention, I was clicking through, was there's this guy in bed, and he's apparently naked. At least you can only see up to about his chest. But he's making an interview. Now, before that, earlier in the show, it might have been immediately before, Dustin had done an interview, and he said, "Honey, I'm sorry we're having problems, and blah, 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 and I miss you, I love you, please come back," and all that. And then they shoot
Cue
to
the video.
heel.
Yes.
Yeah. And this guy's talking blah, blah, blah. And at the end of whatever he said, he lifts the cover, and out from under the cover comes Justin's wife.
Yeah, I can imagine not watching wrestling for a while, and that's the first thing you see, Bob. I can only imagine what was going through your head. What the hell happened to my business?
Oh, my God. I mean, it was really hard to believe that they would do something like that. I mean, a great theater. You mentioned Dr. D. I saw him. Did you ever see his interview where he was talking?
We talked about that inside his house with his quote-unquote family. We've discussed that.
With that little kid. That was another one I couldn't believe. And when they told me, I mean, if it was his own child, would have been horrible enough. But when I found out that was an actor, that kid was a kid actor, that made it even worse because the kid didn't know his role. And while Dr. D was raving and ranting and raving, the kid was just smiling at him. So he barks at the kid, "What are you laughing at?" And the kid's face just crumbled. It looked like he was scared to death. I got a ton of heat with me. I mean, I was being a Mr. Mom for young boys at the time, and one of my sons was about that same age. And I thought, what an a-hole.
The difference, too, between Dr. D and a regular actor is when they yell cut, a regular actor likely went off stage and they began to behave like themselves. And I'm sure when they called cut with that, Dr. D just continued to be Dr. D. And that kid was like, what the fuck just happened here? So, but with Vince, it was always spectacle. With Ole, it was always sport. And there would be gimmicks that came through, but it was still, you had to keep that fundamental, which was sports.
Hey everybody, Gene Jackson here, inviting you to check out the Retro Wrestling Review, where each week I'm joined by some great co-hosts who help me review classic episodes of USWA Championship Wrestling, and right now we are doing week-by-week reviews of 1993. But we don't just do reviews, sometimes we get a chance to interview some of the people who were there and lived it, plus do watch-alongs. It's a lot of fun, so check out new episodes that drop every Wednesday at WrestleCopia.com, and to find links to everything associated to the podcast, you can go to USWApodcast.com.
Hey guys, Ray Russell here, curator of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, inviting you guys to listen to many of the programs here as part of the WrestleCopia brand, including, but not limited to, the Wrestling Memory Grenade, currently covering the 1988 and the WWF project. You can also listen to the Regional Wrestling Podcast, where we talk the territories. You can also listen to the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. But that's not all. You can also check out the Puro Wrestling Academy with the professor of Puro Resu, Mr. Dan Ginnity. Dan and I go back in time and cover the history of Japanese professional wrestling in the English language. And you can listen to all of those shows and more, all part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, located over at WrestleCopia.com. That's WrestleCopia.com, and anywhere your podcast streaming needs are met. And while you're at it, why not subscribe to our social media guys for all the latest goings on here at the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Plus, I'm constantly adding old school video clips and pictures from throughout wrestling history. You can follow us over on X, formerly Twitter, at Wrestling Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, follow and like me, Facebook.com/Wrestling Grenade. And why not subscribe to YouTube.com/Wrestling Grenade. And of course, now would be a fantastic time to become a WrestleCopia patron over at Patreon.com/WrestleCopia. That address again, Patreon.com/WrestleCopia, where you get so many gifts, including all of my insanely detailed show notes for every episode of The Grenade Show, Regional Wrestling, and the Monday Warfare podcast. You'll also get early access to a lot of the podcasts here on the WrestleCopia brand, where you can listen days and sometimes as much as a week earlier than the rest of the listeners. But that's still not all, guys. You also get at least a dozen digital downloads for your viewing and reading pleasure each and every month, plus random bonus video drops, and of course, the Patreon exclusive watch-along series covering many past WWF and WCW events. And if that's not all, videocasts, also now a part of Patreon. No subscription, cancel anytime. Give it a try for a month, guys. I think you'll like the content that I offer, and every penny of it goes right back here into paying the bills. So if you're looking to support that next up-and-coming podcast brand, please consider making it WrestleCopia. Help me pay some of the bills to keep the WrestleCopia Podcast Network and all of the great shows here up and running for the months and the years to come.
Hey, it's Bob Smith, and guess what? The Outdated Wrestling Hour is now part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. But hey, no fear, you're still going to hear the unique guests, comedy, music, authors, journalists, funny people. Who knows who's going to end up on the Outdated Wrestling Hour? Remember, it's all new and all old. So check it out in the WrestleCopia Podcast Network and wherever you get your podcasts. Listen if you know what's good for you.
And before we continue, guys, I want to plug the book. I should do that and actually tell you the name instead of calling it Ole's book. It's Inside Out, How Corporate America Destroyed Professional Wrestling. Scott Teal, Crowbar Press. It's a great book. I've read it inside out myself. So I encourage everyone. And much like any book, there's a few things that you may question. Of course, it's coming from Ole's point of view. So there may be other points of view out there as well. I encourage everybody to go check all points of view out before you gather your own opinions of things. But Ole continues on telling this story. This is something he would know because he was deeply involved in it. And he says, as we continue on, he says, the fact that we were able to put a tape on TBS that quickly was all due to the efforts of and influence of Ann Gunkel. She marched right into Ted's office and said, Ole needs TV. Later on, I was told that Ted thought Ann was part of the ownership. Ann Gunkel was one of a kind. Ann told people anything she thought they wanted to hear, and sometimes she said things you didn't want to hear. In my opinion, Ann Gunkel, Vince McMahon, and Jim Barnett have a lot in common. Now, wow. I'm grateful to Ann because she helped me with Ted on a couple of occasions. For that, I have to say thanks. Of course, she cashed her chips in with me just a few weeks later. Right after the deal with Ted was finalized, she called me and asked for a favor. Ole, I hate to ask you this. I had an idea of what was coming, so I took the bait. What do you need, Ann? Well, I'm really in a lot of trouble. I need some cash. How much do you need, Ann? I need about $5,000 right away to take care of my bills and to put some groceries in the house. She went on to say, next month, I'll get my check and I can pay you back, Ole. At that time, she supposedly had claim to 40 acres in Gwinnett County that her husband, Ray Gunkel, had bought years before. The property was now worth more than $1 million. But what was I going to do? Ann helped me when I needed help and got me back on TV with a minimum of notice. So I gave her the $5,000. That same weekend, I got a call from Ann again. I heard a lot of noise in the background. Where are you, Ann? I asked. Oh, I'm downtown at the Hilton Head, she said. I just had to get away for a few days. When I told that story to Ralph Freed, he laughed at me. You actually gave her the $5,000. I said, yeah, what the hell? I never got my money back. She died of cancer a few years after that. So a couple stories here. Ann being Ann. And she's, when we put her over in the Georgia War, the early to mid 70s, we talked about the way the NWA treated her. And some of the listeners on social media in recent days, I've seen even go back and reference those. So, I want to thank anybody who listened to those episodes, went back and listened to those. They didn't necessarily agree with the way we portrayed Ann as, I guess, a defenseless female. But even Ole here in his book, he goes on, he compares Ann to Barnett and Vince McMahon. I'm not defending Ann as defenseless by any means. I was simply saying when we talked about the Georgia War, what they did to her was bullshit, right? That was the story we were trying to tell. I wasn't saying that Ann was just a dainty little Southern belle. Of course, they've said she knew words that even some men didn't know to use, right? So Ann certainly was able to defend herself verbally and apparently financially at times and whatever she needed to do. But I love the story here. She basically says, well, without saying it, I did you a favor, Ole. Now you're going to pay for me a little vacation.
Yeah. Wow. That's it's funny. I'm at the Hilton. I'm having a party. Yeah, it was your $5,000. Oh, wow. Well, she did do him a big favor. I don't know how Ole could have said no because, she had done a lot for him. Getting him back on TV immediately was a big deal. Mm-hmm. It showed that, it showed McMahon that he wasn't beat yet. He might be beaten down, but, he might be on defense, let's put it that way. But he wasn't beat yet. And so, I'm sure Ole was tight with money, so $5,000 was a lot of money to him. He didn't look at the money he already had as something he could lean on. He looked at the money he hadn't made yet. That's what he was after.
Right.
So I'm sure he was never, he was never extravagant. He didn't drive a Lincoln. He didn't wear, expensive clothes or anything. He was a middle-class guy with middle-class values, background. He was always appropriate. He was always well-kept. Haircut and all that kind of thing. But he was a different guy. That money, he would remember every dollar he gave out that he didn't get back. He would feel stupid, because that was his job was getting money and not screwing people out of it. He would give, but making money legally and ethically. Well, Ann did do him a big favor.
I was wondering what kind of groceries she was putting on her shelves for $5. That's $20,000 in today's money. I was like, damn, Ann, what are you eating? What kind of caviar you got on your shelf there? But apparently it was all just a way to get a nice little getaway there for the weekend. And it's funny that she just talks to him, calls him from this Hilton, having a great old time. And I love the response there. Ralph Fried laughing at Ole. What were you thinking? And Ole's response, what were you going to do? Right? You're kind of in a position where you can't say no. And of course, he never gets the money back, which is, he basically paid $5,000 to stay on TV is what he did. I'd say that he made out, honestly, but a lot of people speculate, and the stories have been out there forever as to why Ann Gunkel had this stronghold over Ted Turner. And I'm sure you guys can let your minds wander a little bit and give a guess as to why that might be. Some say that, maybe Ted and Ann got it on at some point there at least back in the 70s.
Well, Ted used to bring people, celebrities sometimes to the TV taping when we were taping at his station. I remember he brought Raquel Welch. He brought her one time, and he didn't introduce her to anybody, but he was showing her. I think the wrestling was one of the few things that he taped there at the studio.
Right.
Everything else might have been reruns, but I mean, he might have had something else. I'm just not conversant with it, but yeah, he ended up marrying Jane Fonda for a while, didn't he?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So he was hanging around with, a guy's a millionaire, billionaire.
Yeah, he was a well-kept man. I mean, money talks.
Yeah. Well, he always looked good too. He was he looked the part of a millionaire or whatever.
Sure.
I met him. I never was in his office or. I met him on the set. Ole introduced me.
I like when you mentioned that he didn't introduce Raquel Welch to the boys. I was just thinking in my head, probably a really good idea. Just keep her away from the wrestlers.
Yeah. Who knows what somebody might say just to get over with the rest of the boys. Hey, I've always admired your goodies there up front. If you think about it, what Ole did with getting the TV and making was he kept the company alive. And we can go all the way back to things like the Briscoes selling their stock and all that. Because when a company goes out of business, it doesn't matter how much stock you got in it, it's worthless. Your stock is not worth anything because there's nothing that's going to be earning money for you. Your company that was bringing in the money is not working, is no longer there. Your stock is worthless. So the fact that Ole was able to get, even with a new name, to get that show back on the air and to get to start doing business again as close to normal as he could make it, it gave him something. Once he got it established, it gave him something to sell. He had a company that he could sell and make some serious money on. Somebody else would come along and look at a way and say, well, I can take that and I can make a lot of money, like Crockett, for example. Yeah, it was a good move on Ole's part. It saved him a lot of money, and it also saved face in a way. He didn't want the McMahon to. Ole was, he was an amateur wrestler too. He was very competitive, and he didn't want to be able to, the Vince McMahon to be able to say, yeah, I squashed Ole Anderson. I just, left him in the dirt.
I think that's what Vince thought had happened here, because he didn't try to take any talent before he purchased. He didn't bring them with him. He just assumed Ole would be lying in the dirt, and the Georgia promotion that Ole ran would no longer exist because Vince owned it. So what was he going to do? Vince owned Georgia as far as he was concerned. And a week later, he realized, oh shit, these guys aren't going to go away quietly. And then in his book, Ole goes on, he says, so now we were running Championship Wrestling from Georgia. Ralph Fried, Fred Ward, and I were the sole owners of the new company. We used our own money for startup capital, throwing in whatever was necessary to cover the costs of reserving the arenas. After that, we relied on the shows to bring in enough funds to keep our business afloat. But we were really stretched to the limit. It was a slippery slope, and things eventually went to hell in a handbasket. One by one, the wrestlers all began to desert me. Everyone was getting an ultimatum from Vince McMahon. I'll give you a chance to come work for me if you want the job. You have to report to work tomorrow. Ole goes on to say, I have also heard that Vince gave some people the option, you can take a month to get moved up to New York, but you don't work for Ole after today.
Yeah, I have a little bit of experience with that myself. Years later, when I was booking in Florida, I had one of my wrestlers, kid from out west. He later had some problems. Anyway, he called me and he said, Bob, he was one of my major heels I'd been building up. And we had a small crew, but everybody was important because, they were over. He called me and he said, I got a call from Vince McMahon. He offered me to come to work for him. And I said, well, congratulations. You might, I'm just having a memory
Jesse Barr?
Here. Jesse Barr, thank you. And we had a good relationship. He worked hard for me and he was good. I was pushing him as one of the main event heels. I said, well, congratulations. Good for you. And he said, well, the part that's feeling bad about, he says, I gotta be there tomorrow. He said, I have to quit now. And I said, I can't match that. I can't match $5,000 a week. So what can I say except, good luck. You worked hard for me. I hope you have a good career. And I mean, what are you going to do?
Yeah, there's no competition when Vince comes for somebody. I mean, a lot of the territories are screwed, and I get that's why a lot of fans and even a lot of the wrestlers still tell the story that it was Vince that killed professional wrestling. But honestly, at the end of the day, Terry Funk used to say it was cable TV that killed professional wrestling, and I can see where he was coming from with that. But if it wasn't Vince, it was going to be somebody that stepped in and started doing it. Maybe not as aggressive as Vince, but if Jim Crockett had succeeded to the level where Vince was at and been the top promotion in the United States, even at that point, he would say, well, I really like this Junkyard Dog guy. We need him on this. So even Jim Crockett or somebody in that position is eventually going to make some of those phone calls. Maybe not all of them, but he's going to try to pillage to some degree. So right. I get blaming Vince to a degree in the way he handled things, and he went against the rules that were kind of in place up until that point. But at the same time, business-wise, I don't necessarily blame him, and that's why Ole goes on here. He says, Vince began making call to all the boys. Nikolai Volkov, Les Thornton, Don Jardine, the spoiler. They were three of them. We were all at the airport having just returned for Columbus, Ohio. We were going to jump in our cars and head to Macon for a TV taping. I had heard a rumor that they were going to work for Vince, so I confronted them. Just tell me the truth, guys. If you're going to go, fine. I just want to know because I have a couple of hours. If I get started now, I can get some bodies down to Macon. Oh, no. We're not going to leave you. We're not going to leave. We're not going to go to Vince. We'll be there. We'll be at the TV taping. A few hours later, I stood right over Don Jardine in the dressing room at TV and asked, are you going to work for Vince McMahon? No, he answered. If you are, I want to know right now. No, I'm not going, said Jardine. Well, he didn't go then, but he went a week or two later. Nikolai Volkov and Les Thornton left the airport that afternoon. I never saw them again. No, I take that back. I saw them on WWF TV. Not too long after that, I asked Ted DiBiase, Ted, do you have any plans to jump to McMahon? No, I'm staying right here with you, he assured. A week later, he told me I need to go home to my wife and family. He took a shortcut. He left Atlanta, made a stopover in New York on his way home to Mississippi. So, to be clear, now DiBiase did not go work for Vince immediately after this, but Ole implies that DiBiase did go up there and test the waters and kind of get an idea of what Vince might have had for him at this point in time. And I think I've heard that before, and Ted's might have even mentioned that, but DiBiase's going to go back and make some good money working for Bill Watts through, well, till the Cowboy sells, basically, in early 87 to Crockett. But then he's also got a Japanese deal. DiBiase's going to be working a lot of the headline matches with Stan Hansen as his partner, working for Baba. So DiBiase leaves the company. The Road Warriors go to Vern. So even if everybody didn't go to Vince McMahon, they were still jumping ship because, well, they didn't feel like fighting the good cause.
Yeah, it's like if your varsity team all disappear and you have to bring in, the scrubs. The first string is gone. You have to bring in the second stringers, who some of them are, not really that great, or certainly if they're not well known. So yeah, we had to have not only start anew with a horrible time slot, but with new talent, people that hadn't been really gotten over yet. So, yeah, it was an uphill climb, big time. And I'm sure Ole was, he was going to fight as much as he could. But he and Ralph and Fred Ward, if they started having to, every week, if they each had to be kicking in $10,000, $15,000, it wouldn't take too long. It wouldn't take probably more than a week or two for them, if they knew it was going to continue, to say, hey, we need to do something else. We need to fold the tent. But Ole, ended up with something he could sell, right? So, yeah, those were difficult times. And the Ole didn't keep me apprised of a lot of the stuff you're talking about is news to me too, because he wouldn't come and tell me. He wouldn't come and complain and say, oh, so and so screwed me around. He wasn't that kind. He just moved on. Whatever it was, he just moved on. Yeah, that's another thing I always admired about him. His attitude was, he didn't say it, but his attitude is, I'm not beat until I think I'm beat. I'm not defeated until I think I'm defeated. And he never thought he was defeated. Because he always had so many ways to go. And he also had that fortune behind him, to lean on. He could have retired right then and been comfortable for the rest of his life. But he didn't want to go out that way. He was still, we're 40 in wrestling. He's relatively young. I talked about the guys in Europe. Some of them had to be in their 60s and 70s that were still working, going out there in the ring and not doing hardly anything at all. But they would draw, people would come to watch them do hardly anything at all, just based on the fact they've been around for 40 years. I had to, still to this day, I have to hand it to Ole for the way that he brought all his resources together by having created a strong bond with Fred Ward and Ralph Reed. I got to know Ralph a lot. Fred didn't come out much. Yeah, Ole fought back the best way he could, and I think he did pretty well. The $5,000 to Ann Gunkel, that's not totally surprising either. If you've been around the wrestling business for 10, 15, 20 years, and as the wife of the former boss, Ray Gunkel, she knew through him all the crap that goes with being a wrestling promoter, what wrestlers do. She might have had to help get guys bailed out of jail, get bailed out of jail, sometimes for the second or third time, or, DUI or something. I remember when I was booking in Florida, the calls would come to me because I was the booker. Hiro Matsuda and Duke Kiyomuka were the owners, but they were going to call them to come get them out of jail or whatever. They called me. It didn't happen every day, but every couple of weeks there'd be something, extracurricular, having nothing to do with the wrestling business, of guys getting themselves in trouble. And I behaved in a way I could have gotten in trouble, 1,000 times myself, just with that drinking beer on the way home from wrestling shows. You get pulled over and there's 15 or 20 empty beer cans in the back seat or on the floor of the front seat, and who knows what else. The car smells like pot. You got problems. Ole came through that. I thought, again, I'm down, but I'm not out. So again, my hat's off to him in retrospect.
Yeah, everything that Vince is throwing at him, it's affecting Ole. He's certainly making dinks and dents in the armor and the chinks in the armor, as they say, of Ole's promotion of Ole Anderson's business. Really, Vince starts off by when you guys had the talent, before Vince completely took over, when you had the Jakes and the Buzz Sawyers and things of that nature. And we talked about those calls that possibly were coming in, alerting the police to come and maybe check out a few of the bags. And now we've gotten to the point where Vince takes over and he's like, ha, I got you, pal. And they're like, well, I'm not done yet. And he goes to, Ann comes to him, or he goes to Ann, or however that works out. And he gets TV immediately. And then he's like, well, shit, let me take your talent. And of course, like I said, the rats are leaving the ship. You talk about the roadie's going to go make some money for Vern, and DiBiase going back to the Cowboy and working for All Japan. So Ole's kind of looking around like, what the hell do I do? And that's when he joins up with Jerry Jarrett. And we're going to get there right now. He says, with talent deserting at a fast clip, I hooked up with Jerry Jarrett, who's promoting Memphis, Tennessee. We traded talent, and manager Jimmy Hart came to work for me. Jimmy Hart, though, stiffed me in Cleveland and didn't show up. Now, Jimmy did come down for a little bit there in Memphis, cut some promos and do some things. And in reverse order, up in Memphis, the very weirdest thing, Gordon Soley becomes Lance Russell's co-host to see two of the greatest announcers in the world team up there just for a month or so. And then Gordon disappears. And in the very first week of 1985, Gordon is gone with little explanation other than Lance Russell sending him off, like appreciating Gordon for stopping by for the last few weeks and being on the program. But Gordon's gone, and the Georgia talent leaves Tennessee, and the Tennessee talent leaves Georgia. So I don't know what went wrong there, but apparently something didn't work out, and Ole's left holding his, again. So that was another attempt in trying to find some talent, some outsourced talent from the Memphis territory, kind of trading back and forth. But Vince, taking all of that talent, all of the big names leaving, Ole goes on to say, I was using guys like Jim Starr, who was working as the Beast 666 in Central States by this point. I also had Ron Ritchie and the Italian Stallion. Those were my main event people. They were nice enough guys, but they weren't the kind of talent you drew money with on a national level. And you talked about it. These were not guys who had been established yet. Gary Sabaw, the Italian Stallion, Ron Ritchie, they were nice enough guys. They were capable enough guys, but they hadn't been established, and they would never see, even mid-card talent level most of their career. And going back to Jim Starr, there was a guy who probably should have retired before this point in his career because he had been an intern. He had done, his biggest days were long behind him by this point. And when you were working Central States in the mid-'80s, that doesn't say a whole lot. So for him to be booked here on the Ole shows too, Ole was really grasping for straws.
Yeah, I vaguely remember those guys. During that period with, I wasn't aware of the deal between him and Jerry Jarrett, but I remember going over to Memphis and working against Jerry Lawler.
Right.
And then Lawler came and was on Ole's show at TBS a few times, and I worked with him there too on TV, I think. I can't remember exactly what we did, but I'm sure I put him over. But I remember going and headlining with him in Memphis. I don't remember if it was Great House or not. It couldn't have been too bad, but it was cold. We'd maybe done one or two things in the Georgia TV to set that up. But why did you ever find out what happened? What caused a breakup?
No, I don't know that it's explained in his book. If it is, it's in a different chapter. I've never tell exactly what went down there. Obviously, there was some issues somewhere because it just happens overnight. We see a few of the talent up there from Georgia in Memphis. They're just quietly dropped all at the same time. I can't remember who it was off the top of my head, but they're gone. Gordon's gone, and everything's just back to the way it was a couple months prior. The entire thing didn't last more than a couple months, the trade-off. I remember Jimmy Hart being on TV down here. I remember Jerry Lawler coming through here and working with you, and those matches are out there. They're on YouTube if anybody wants to go check those out, by the way. Bob Roop versus the King. But Ole goes on. He says, we were scraping the bottom of the barrel, trying to keep a handle on a ragtag bunch of guys who were disappearing on a regular basis because Vince McMahon was making them promises. We were barely making enough money to stay alive. In retrospect, the guys were smart enough to do what they had to do. I have to look back and admit that I was the dummy. The way things were going at the time, they weren't going to make money with me. They were going to make money with Vince McMahon. There was no doubt about it. I couldn't fault them for that. I fault them for only this. They should have said, yeah, we're going to work for Vince. You can't compete against him. If you think you can, you're dreaming a dream. He's going to make us a lot more money than you'll ever make us. Not only that, but I hate working for you, Ole. You don't know anything about the wrestling business. I think you're a no-good bastard, and I want you to hear this from my own mouth that we're leaving and going to work for Vince. So a little long-winded there, and Ole. I don't know if anybody was going to talk to him like that, but he basically wanted the truth. He just wanted guys to come out and tell him, yeah, this guy over here's offered us way more money. This is not going to work out here, and we're jumping ship, rather than just kind of disappear like thieves in the night. Yeah,
well, so in retrospect, Jesse Barr did me a favor. Yeah. Or showed some respect, at least calling me. and telling me instead of just disappearing. What are you going to do if you're like, I'm transposing myself into Ole's place. What would you do if somebody called you and said, look, he offered me this. Can you match that? Vince offered me $2,000 a week or $5,000, whatever. Can you match that? Because, I have a family. I've got to take the wrestling business. A lot of people said the only reason to be a pro wrestler is to make money. So that wasn't my attitude. I'm definitely an exception to the rule because all the wear and tear, and we talked about the sacrifices that you make personally in terms of your personal life with your connection with your family, being able to watch your kids do things as they grow up, and you miss all that. And for what? You're staying in motels, you're up and down the road, you're tired, you're beat, you're judged sometimes, and you still got to keep, your book, you still got to keep working. What other reason to do it but it's for money? So if any of those guys, when Ole asked them, all they would have had to say was, Vince offered me, X amount of dollars. Or even if that wasn't the case, he says he's going to use me, Ole, and I think that he's going to be able to make, I think with the situation, his television and his company, as opposed to where your company is right now, I think for the security of me and my family and financially, I think that it's a better decision for me to go with him. Ole would have respected that. But what's he going to say? He would respect that because that's what he was about, was money. So if people said, he's offering me this, but Jesse Barr told me, I think he was making maybe $800 on top down there in Florida, maybe $1,000. Yeah, he got offered 5 times what you're making, the 6. Of course you're going to take it. That's business. That's everybody in the world is looking to get promoted. Why? Not mainly for stature, but to make more money and have more perks or whatever that go with the job. Mm-hmm. So he wouldn't have blamed anybody. It just came to me, and this is just a guess, but it's very possible that McMahon told him, if you want to take this offer, you can't tell Ole. I can see him doing that. Don't tell, if he asks you if you're leaving, don't tell him.
It was very peculiar how that worked, too, because in some territories, the guys would say, Vince would tell them, well, go on and finish your dates. If you're booked for this week, finish your dates and then come on up. In other ones, he would tell them, you have to leave immediately. Now, I don't know what the process was behind that, if it was because he liked certain promoters to some degree or whatever the story may have been there. But you hear different stories from different guys depending on the territory. And I would think here with this Ole situation, I don't know if Vince gave them directive not to say a word or whatever the case may be. But I do know that they clearly leave abruptly. They leave immediately, at least according to Ole. And we see that too. They drop right off the booking sheets, right. Basically right when they would have if they had left after Vince took over. So, and they do pop up with World Wrestling Federation shortly right after that. So makes total sense why Ole would at least hypothesize that something like that was going on. And he talks about business here, and he talks a little bit more in the book. He talks about booking guys like Buzz Sawyer, who may have been a pain to some people, but he liked Buzz Sawyer. We've discussed this in the past. We don't know why he liked Buzz Sawyer, but he was just some sort of camaraderie between those two. I don't know if that's the right word to use, but something there. And Ole said, no, as much as I liked the guy, do you think I would have booked them if they weren't drawing me money? Absolutely not. So Ole Anderson making a point that business is business at the end of the day, and Vince was just taking anybody he could, whether they were going to draw him a dime or otherwise, just to screw with all of the territories. In this case, it's Ole's. And he goes on here. I'm going to read one more excerpt, guys, before we close up this week. And he talks about the phrase, it's just business. He says, no matter how much I liked or disliked someone, my using them in the business had nothing to do with whether or not I liked them personally. It's funny when I thought about it, because we've come right back to the statement that Vince made to me. It's just business. I used that phrase all of my life, but when Vince used it on me, I was too mad to see it. I wasn't able to make that stretch. I didn't quite understand what business was when it applied to me. But when I was applying it to everyone else, it was just business. I thought I was protecting the business for everybody, so I told Vince, go fuck yourself. And yet virtually everybody else was trying to figure out how to sell out. Name anyone. just about everyone was ready to sell out because the guys stood to make a lot of money by going to work for Vince McMahon. That's understandable. I could have sold out to Vince right then and there, but I wouldn't do it. Wouldn't do it. I should have done it with everyone else when they did it. Vince, buy this damn thing. I'm selling it. If you want it, I'll run it for you. I'll work for you. I'll do whatever you want. I'll even shut up and listen. Wait a minute now. I'm getting carried away. I could never shut up for anybody, no matter how much they paid me. Which is, it seems, I would venture to guess that's true.
That's true. Yeah, I can't see him shutting up, but he would figure out a way to work with him if that was the case. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you know, hindsight's always 20/20. It cost him a lot of money to his temper. It's like I'm aware of the fact that personally, when I'm angry, mm-hmm. I lose about half my intellect. I have high IQ. I'm not bragging. I just fortunate that I do. When I'm mad, about half of it disappears. And I may say or do things that are, they're not smart at all, not intelligent. And you look back later and you go, oh my God, how could I possibly do that? But at the time, you're talking about a pretty abrupt shift to where Ole is running things and making a lot of money and has been doing it for a couple of years. And all of a sudden it comes to a screeching halt with the revelation that his former partners in the business have sold him out. And that sounds, they sold out. I'm not going to say sold him out. And what we've been talking about over the last 2 or 3 months goes back to, if there was ever any criticism of the Briscoe brothers for selling out, that criticism is just totally wasted, because if they knew that Vince had the opportunity, if he even told them, I'm going to get that company, I'm going to put that company out of business. But I'll buy your shares now for, I think, $300,000 or whatever they paid him. Of course, that's the way to go.
And I think in a lot of people's minds, it is always business until it is personal, right? When it becomes, and that's what Ole says there is, I used that phrase my entire life until it was reflected on me. And it was hard for me to grasp. It was just business when it was personal to me. And I think that happens with pretty much anybody, really, at the end of the day, because it becomes personal, because it's affecting you, the human being. And so Ole let his anger, his competitiveness, and everything else get involved. And obviously, he wasn't done trying to run a wrestling promotion either. You're not going to just tell me I'm not allowed to promote anymore, Vince McMahon. He looked back and he goes, man, I should have just took that money and went and did something else or whatever. But again, like you said, hindsight 20/20, and we'll have more on that as Ole continues on. We're now going into 1985, which means we're just about ready for Ole to give up. It's okay. And he's going to sell his, whatever he's got here in the Georgia territory, over to Jim Crockett Promotions. And we'll talk about that and your little tenure there before somebody doesn't want Bobby Roop around, baby. And so,
yeah,
he saw the signs and decided to take off from the Georgia territory. But we've got that coming up, Bob. We've got a lot still to talk about.
Yes, I'm looking forward to it. I apologize to you and to our lovely fans out there listening to this. I apologize for my memory lapses today. I don't think I'm losing it, but who knows? Anyway, thank you for putting up with it, and thank you for listening. Thanks for being with us again. I hope everybody out there stays well. Don't forget Waterloo in middle of July. Love to see you there. And thank you, Ray, for today. I've enjoyed it very much.
Absolutely. Well, while we're apologizing, I too want to apologize for any noise in the background that may incur when you guys are listening to this, maybe about midway through the show. Unfortunately, we're not recording at our normal days, so I knew that my neighbor would be out there cutting his grass, gets out his big old tractor lawnmower gimmick over there, and I said, he doesn't normally cut it till 1 o'clock, so I said, I'm going to beat that. We're going to go record before that, and he beat me, Bob. He decided he was going to cut the grass early and screw us over, but that's okay. Things happen, and at the end of the day, hopefully everybody enjoyed the program either way, and we'll be back next week, guys. We continue on the story of Georgia. We're almost at the end of it now. It's sad to say because there's so much that's happened over the last several weeks here on the show talking about this run. Who knew that it would go this long? But lots of great insight from Ole and lots of great stories that's come out thus far, and just talking about some of the talent that's been here. And we're going to talk about what happens when Ole decides to fold up shop here in Georgia, sell out to Jim Crockett. Crockett's going to take over Ole. Crockett's going to take over the Vince time slot on TBS, and we'll have a true number 2 promotion running against the WWF before the spring of 1985. But for this week, we're getting ready to wrap things up, guys. We'll be back soon. Another Wrestling Stoop around the corner. Thanks again, Bob.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you, folks out there. Stay well.